So when you were about 41, in 1996, you published The Story of the Night, your first novel with a gay protagonist. So did this represent some kind of more public coming out for you?
Yeah, it was a very big deal. What happened really was that I'd written 2 novels, and I was having supper with Marcia Rowe, and we were talking about the possibility of me writing another novel and what it would be about, and she raised the subject. She said, it is a bit odd, if you don't mind me saying so, that you've never written about the subject. I said, well, I don't know, I'm not sure I have anything to say, all the things. You say, oh, you must be joking. I mean, at some stage you're going to have to do it because no novelist cannot. It seems to me that you're avoiding the issue. She said this very pleasantly, but very firmly and intelligently. And then she wrote to say that she was editing an anthology on infidelity. And could I give her something for that? So I gave her the first chapter of The Story of the Night, which I wrote very quickly. And of course, it was written in the first person, almost as a 18th century confession novel. This is who I really am. It was set in Argentina, where I had been a lot, which was even more repressed for gay people, say in the 80s, than Ireland ever was. I mean, you would meet gay people in Argentina in the 80s who had never told anyone that they were gay. In other words, they'd had casual sex, so obviously the person they'd had that with knew they were gay, but they'd no friend they'd ever told. In Ireland, there was a big case, which was one of mine, of you come out of your friends and half your family. Some people know, some people guess, and some people just don't think about those things. And
or they know in Dublin and not in the country.
Yes, and there's an old aunt who would kill her if she found out. So that a lot of Irish people in the 80s especially were living very comfortably like that. It was a norm, as opposed to in America where you would do a coming out party and overnight your granny, the whole lot of them would just know and just have to put up with it. Ireland was moving more gingerly towards openness and freedom, but Argentina wasn't. So anyway, I wrote the novel, and publishing it was really, a very big deal. I did a reading from it in Listowel, at Listowel Writers' Week, which is a small town in County Kerry in the west of Ireland. And a brother of a friend of mine didn't come to the reading, but he came into the pub after and looked at me and said, there's a lot of talk about you up the town. He said it very sweetly, but also, there were a number of writers there who were very careful to make sure that I was okay about it, because they knew what a big deal it was, for example, to read from the book openly. It shouldn't have been a big deal, but nonetheless it was. I mean, you are so much braver and better.
Oh, it was like that for all of us in the 90s. It was nerve-wracking the first time we had to answer all those stupid questions from the journalists, who often didn't want to talk about our novels at all. They wanted to say, when did you first have same-sex sex?
Yeah, but I suppose there's nothing more interesting than gossip, of finding out something completely new about someone you know. So that I sort of understood that everybody thought, oh, wow, look at you.
So The Story of the Night and The Blackwater Lightship, which you published in 1999, they could both be seen in some ways as coming out novels or as AIDS novels. What do you feel about AIDS fiction as a genre? Does it make sense to you as a label?
I suppose I was terribly interested, especially in The Story of the Night, in establishing that people who got sick in those years were not destined to do so, and that it came as an enormous shock to people what was happening to their bodies, because it was not happening to their souls. And I thought that was a terribly important story to establish. And in the novel The Blackwater Lightship, I actually came across a case of someone whose family I knew. And again, he was out in the city, not out in the country, not out at home. But he was going to have to go home and not only tell them that he was gay, but that he was dying. And I thought that was the saddest story I'd ever heard. And he was so beautiful and so young and so ready for his life. And this was going to happen to him. And I just thought it was awful business. And it was a story that, I remember doing everything possible not to write it. I'd love to write a story about the 50s and emigration and the famine, all the things, other things have happened in Ireland. But one August in Barcelona, there I was with the opening of the book, and suddenly realizing that I had a story that would not leave me alone, which was that story of a boy in that condition in Ireland, and how then the family would sort of handle it. And so I wasn't aware, in a sense, of a genre, whether AIDS fiction or even gay fiction, as much as something that was really impelling me, that was urgent, that I couldn't avoid telling, even though with the second novel, especially The Blackwater Lightship, I did try not to write it.
You've got a great collection of essays, Love in a Dark Time, about gay writers from Wilde to Almodovar. And you say in the introduction that you really didn't intend to write a book on gay themes. So how did it happen to you despite yourself?
The City of London is a great thing. I always say, as an Irish person, I'm so proud of us that we built it. And it's full of serious liberal people, you know, who were way ahead of me when I arrived there first, you know. And so I started to write for the London Review of Books. And what I was writing for them about was Irish history. And if anything came up, for example, on the 150th anniversary of the Great Irish Famine, I got every book published, and I wrote a very long piece about that. But of course they said to me, well, why don't you start writing about sexuality? And I said, oh, I don't think, like, I'm not a queer theorist. There are loads of those going around. I'm not one of them. And I'm not sure I want to do this. But of course, what they would then start to do was send me, you know, a biography of Thomas Mann, or send me a biography of James Baldwin, or let me review Elizabeth Bishop's letters. And what happened was, each time the book would arrive, I would think, actually, that's really interesting. And then I would sit down and do it. And then over a number of years, I realized that I had been working without meaning to, on trying to create a bedrock somehow, a movement that we can chart very easily, from two men, for example, who died because they were gay, who are Oscar Wilde, who really didn't survive his prison experience, and Roger Casement, who was hanged by the British, partly for, I mean, he took part in the 1916 rebellion, or tried to import arms from Germany, but essentially it was because they found his diaries. So two men who died because of it, and coming to the end where I went to interview Almodovar, living in Spain, who had created a sort of new sensibility, not only for gay people in Spain, but for Spanish people in Spain, arising from his confidence about his sexuality. Or a figure in America like Mark Doty, who was writing this exquisitely beautiful poetry. And so you were moving over 100 years from darkness to light. And in the middle of this is the heroic figure, for me, of Tom Gunn, who haunts me in his heroism. For suddenly in his love poetry, moving from saying you to saying he, which, you know, he didn't do in his first books. And it seems to me, for gay people, almost like what the Annunciation is for Christians, when Tom Gunn moves in a poem to saying it, that there's that flash of light you get in those wonderful paintings of the Annunciation, when the Saviour is coming, that it can be said by a great poet in a poem 1 month when it couldn't be said the month before.
You say that the essay collection moves from darkness to light, but you're really very interested in the darkness end of the spectrum, aren't you? You've got that great quote from Thomas Mann, where he says in a letter to his son, "The secret and almost silent adventures in life are the finest." So do you think secrecy is the bedrock of good storytelling?
I'm locked in to a part of history that I cannot escape, which is that I almost live part of my life in the lives of the generation earlier than mine, so that I belong in certain ways to the 40s and 50s, as much as I belong to the 90s or the noughties. And that elements of shame, fear, darkness surrounding not only homosexuality indeed, but heterosexuality, but especially homosexuality, and especially my own, continue to haunt me. In other words, I come too late to the liberation business to have a fully uncluttered imagination by it. But I don't think that secrecy and I don't think they necessarily nourish a writer. That I think it would be possible out of the great Californian openness for someone to produce a masterpiece where that was an almost medieval concept, but the masterpiece was come out of some other problem or conflict in human relations. But I'm just too old. I mean, maybe I should do a lot of therapy and see if I could just get out of it for once. And I think that if you were writing now in Ireland, if you were gay and young, you'd be over it all, and there'd be another story to tell. It'd be a funnier story, but it could even be a darker story because you could find some reach of the human heart in terms of love, or in terms of other forms of treachery and secrecy that are not necessarily the old, shameful ones about being gay.